بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. وبعد, to continue inshallah with the nawafil. So we spoke last week about the main nawafil, the nawafil of the day, the rawatib and the sunan, etc. And we have moved on to the second section, al-qism al-thani. And inshallah next week hopefully we'll cover al-qism al-thalith. So prior to going into al-qism al-thani, just to repeat that which was mentioned last week, perhaps not in this particular class but in the other class, which is it's very important for us to have goals, obviously, and we often have goals when it comes to most areas of our lives, other than when it comes to our spiritual development, i.e. ibadah and akhlaq. How do you work on your akhlaq, and where do akhlaq come from? They come from the heart. If you have a sound heart, your character will be sound. If you have a corrupt heart, your character will be corrupt. For example, if you think about anger, what's the issue with anger? The issue is an issue of the heart. There are reasons behind the anger. The anger is simply a manifestation of that which is in the heart. Likewise, for example, pride. Likewise, for example, arrogance. Likewise, for example, actions which stem from envy. So all of these issues, they have to be worked on. The heart is supposed to be worked on for the duration of our lives. And this is something that we don't pay any attention to today, unfortunately, all of us. And the second aspect, or the first prior to that, as the first leads to the second, is ibadat. So having a target in ibadah. So we should try to set levels for ourselves. The first level, I'm praying my fara'id on time. The second level, fara'id with rawatib. The third level, fara'id with rawatib and perhaps, for example, qiyam. The fourth level, perhaps increasing the qiyam, etc. So we have goals. We're constantly working upwards. And if you're constantly looking upwards, then you won't become happy with where you are, nor will you regress. If you do regress, you regress slightly, but you continue upon your journey. So you might dip, but then climb another peak. Dip again, climb another peak. And this has to be the case with ibadah, just as it is usually with knowledge. So when a person starts to practice Islam, or they first become Muslim, there is a lot of focus on knowledge. I want to learn how to read, I want to learn how to read the Quran, I want to study this, I want to study that, etc. But there isn't much focus on ibadah, i.e. we become happy if we're doing the basics and that which is slightly above the basics. And so there has to be a target that we constantly are trying to reach. It's very important. Likewise, for example, in sins. So let's say, for example, I know myself. I know that I'm sinning daily. I need to set a goal. I want to reduce my sins. It might become every few days a week I fall into a sin, but then it becomes once a week, and then it becomes no sin, and then it becomes when my sins are makruhat, which was the state of the awliya of the past, where their sins were engaging in that which is disliked or leaving off that which is virtuous. That was the type of sin that the awliya would commit. But if we don't have targets, it's very easy to what? To become content with where you are, and then you stagnate, and long term what happens? You regress. And so it's important to set goals. Where am I now? And what was said last week is the best way to try to set a goal for yourself is to ask, who do I want to be when I meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Who do I want to be? Do I want to be a hafiz of the Quran? Do I want to be someone who recites a chapter of the Quran daily, 3 chapters of the Quran daily, 10 chapters of the Quran daily, perhaps? Do I want to be a person who dies in a state of fasting? Do I want to be a person who dies and I've given sadaqah on that day? I visited a sick person on the day, and so on and so forth. And then what do? I look at where I am now, and I measure the distance between the two, i.e. I set milestones for myself. Okay, I want to die as a hafiz of the Quran. Okay, where am I now? Now I've memorized, let's say, half a chapter, maybe a chapter, maybe 1 surah. It doesn't matter. I set a goal, and it becomes a long-term goal. And then I'm racing with myself, not with anyone else. And if I have sidq, i.e. I have sincerity in my sincerity, it's not tamanni, it's not hope. It's not, I hope that I die as a hafiz of the Quran. No, I'm actually trying to die as a hafiz of the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will facilitate it for us. And if we don't have the facilitation of it in this life, Allah will facilitate the reward of it in the akhirah. Why? Because the Prophet ﷺ, he said, وَلِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَا نَوَى. For every person is that which he intended. I.e., if you don't receive the reward, or the action doesn't facilitate itself in this life, you'll get the reward for it. And so it's important to have that aspiration, etc., individually. And then again, we could talk about collective goals. Where are we as a collective, etc. But it's very important. And the Prophet ﷺ, he spoke about ihsan, al-ihsanu fi kulli shay, to have the application of ihsan, i.e., applying myself to the best of my ability in everything that I do. Of course, we don't want to fall into perfectionism, because that can become problematic. But it's the idea that I'm going to try my best. I'm not going to be content with simply doing the minimum. If I memorize the Quran, why not memorize more? I.e., another riwayah, another qira'ah, and so on and so forth. If I've memorized a book of hadith, add another book to it. If I'm praying qiyam once a week, make it 3, make it 5. And I live like that until I meet Allah. That should be the way that we apply ourselves. We apply ourselves in that way when it comes to finance. We apply ourselves in that way when it comes to fitness. Today, for example, we have fitness trackers and fitness apps, and people are measuring how strong they are in accordance to how much they can lift, etc. But do we have ibadah trackers? Do we have spirituality trackers, i.e., the state of the heart? I should also look at my akhlaq. What issues do I have in my heart? Work on them one at a time. And if you do this, you'll find your life changes completely. Your marriage will become better. Your friendships will become better. Your general state, your well-being will become better. Why? Because you're dealing with the issues that are the actual reasons for issues in your life. Poverty is not the problem. The problem is the way you feel in poverty, the way you react to poverty. Where does that come from? The heart. Contentment, lack of contentment, etc. And so it's important to think in that way and to set goals and live for the long-term goal of meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As ultimately, the reason that we're here is to pass away to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It sounds morbid to those that don't understand, but that's why we're here. We're here to be tested so that we can pass away and meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and hopefully He's pleased with us. May Allah make that the case. So he says, القسم الثاني i.e. من النوافل ما يتكرر بتكرر السنين وهي صلاة العيدين والتراويح. So the second section of النوافل, voluntary prayers, that which repeats due to the repetition of years. So we have the first category, that which repeats due to the repetition of days. The second, that which repeats due to the repetition of years. He says, and they are 2, although 2 but 3. Salatul Eidain, so the 2 Eid prayers, and Tarawih, Tarawih in Ramadan. He says, Salatul Eidain وهي سنة مؤكدة وشعار من شعائر الدين وينبغي أن يراعى فيها 7 أمور. So he says that it is a sunnah mu'akkada, and also it's from the sha'air of Islam. So it's from the signposts of Islam. It's a signature of Islam. When a person sees it, they know that this is something to do with Islam. When a non-Muslim walks past and hears Allahu Akbar, etc., they know that's the sound that the Muslims call for when they're praying, etc. The adhan, it's from the sha'air of the deen. So likewise, the Salatul Eidain. And there are issues that are related to this in fiqh. The sha'air of the deen, if they are not established, what's the ruling of that? For the ruler, for the collective, etc. The sha'air, they have to be established. It's a collective responsibility. And so if they are not being established, the collective are sinning until they are established by the collective. And alhamdulillah, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's grace, here we pray the Salatul Eidain, i.e. here in the UK, the way that they should be prayed to the best of our ability anyway. He says, Al-awwalu, so the 7 issues, the 7 points that should be taken into consideration and looked after during the salah. He says, Al-awwalu at-takbiru thalathan nasaqan fayaqulu Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar kabira, walhamdulillahi kathira, wa subhanallahi bukratan wa asila, la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu, mukhlisina lahu din, walau kariha al-kafirun. And I'm not going to go into the details, the translation, etc. But many of the masajid you hear, they repeat this on the loudspeakers, the imams, the muaddins, etc. And some may argue, which is the sunnah? Is it sunnah to add this part, that part, etc.? This is Imam Ghazali, Hujjatul Islam, one of the aimma of the Shafi'i school, and he's saying that this is the sunnah. So there's no argument to be had here. Then he says يفتتح بالتكبير ليلة الفطر إلى الشروع في صلاة العيد. So when does the takbir start, i.e. that which was just called out, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar kabira, to the end of it? He says from the night of Eid al-Fitr. So from the night of Eid until the commencement of the Eid prayer. So it's sunnah to be called out, to be read out for that period of time. Then he says وفي العيد الثاني يفتتح التكبير عقيب الصبح يوم عرفة إلى آخر النهار من يوم الثالث عشر ويكبر عقب الصلوات المفروضة. So he says that the second Eid, i.e. Eid al-Adha, the takbir should start عقيب الصبح يوم عرفة. So the day of Arafah, just before the subh prayer, i.e. Fajr, until the end, إلى آخر النهار من يوم الثالث عشر, until the end of the day, the 13th day of Hajj, basically. ويكبر عقب الصلوات المفروضة. And as we practice here, the takbirat are to be carried out after the salawat al-mafrudat. Then he says الثاني إذا أصبح يوم العيد يغتسل ويتزين ويتطيب. So he says when a person wakes up on the day of Eid, they should perform the ghusl and beautify themselves and perfume themselves كما ذكرناه في الجمعة, just as has been mentioned in Jum'ah. So everything that applies to Jum'ah applies here, perhaps with more exaggeration. More exaggeration, not meaning that we wear exaggerated clothes, etc. But there's more exaggeration on the purification and wearing nice clothing and washing, etc. Why? Because Jum'ah, you may miss it. 1 week or another, you may miss it. You may not perfume yourself on a Jum'ah, for example. But here it's something which is highly recommended to do, as it's a great celebration, Eid. The Eid of Ramadan, it's a celebration that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted us success, amongst other reasons, to fast the month of Ramadan, which is a great success. And the tawfiq of ibadah comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. If you think about the salah that we prayed now, Isha, who granted us the success to pray here? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, especially for those that are young. And as I said before, you can make up your mind what's young and what's not young. But if you're a young person and you're praying and you have dedication to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this time now, that's only from the success granted to you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because in our time today, a young person has the opportunity to fulfill their desires to the extent that no people that came before us could ever fulfill their desires to. It's possible for you to fulfill your desires to the most extreme forms of fulfillment, and you can even do so, and people won't even know that you're doing it. Yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted the young person today dedication to the deen. That's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given that person tawfiq. And so the way to keep the tawfiq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with you is through shukr. The way to keep the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with you is to be grateful for the blessings that Allah has given you. The moment you start to become ungrateful is the moment that you will lose out on those blessings. The person who has wealth, if they are not grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will lose out on the blessing of wealth. That may not mean that he loses out on the wealth, but he loses out on the potential reward with that wealth, and the wealth becomes harmful to him. Likewise, the same for knowledge. A person who acquires knowledge, if they are not grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they will lose the virtue of that knowledge. And so they can very easily fall into being a person who uses the knowledge for the wrong reason, which is worse than using money for the wrong reason. Likewise, ibadah, if you're not grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the ibadah, you might find yourself unable to perform the ibadah. And so it's very important, shukr. It's one of the most important parts of Islam, if not the most important part of Islam. So he says, الثالث أن يخرج من طريق ويرجع من آخر هكذا فعل رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وكان يأمر بإخراج العواتق وذوات الخدور. So the third point to take into consideration and to practice on Eid is to leave from one route and to return from another. So whether you're walking whether you're driving, etc., try to take one route to the masjid or to the Eid Salah, the Musalla, and another route home. Why? It's a practice of the Prophet ﷺ. Some of the ulama, they say, so that the path can testify to your worship on Yawm al-Qiyamah. And he said, the Prophet ﷺ, he used to request the people to come out, including al-awatiq, i.e. pubescent young ladies, and dawatul khudur, so unmarried young ladies, who would usually remain in their houses. So one of the practices of the Arabs prior to Islam and after Islam was that young unmarried ladies, they would preserve themselves from public, i.e. they wouldn't mingle with the public too much, and they would remain in their homes, etc. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he even requested those individuals to come out and to witness the Eid Salah. Then he says, الرابع المستحب الخروج إلى الصحراء إلا بمكة وبيت المقدس فإن كان يوم مطر فلا بأس بالصلاة في المسجد. He says the fourth is that it's recommended that a person or that the people pray in a sahra, so in a desert area, in case of the land having that, i.e. a vacant space is the best way to put it, a vacant space which is not the masjid. So a large vacant space which is large enough to hold all of the Muslims. The recommended practice is for a person or for the jama'ah to be held in such a place, unless it's Mecca and Baytul Maqdis. If it's Mecca and Baytul Maqdis, the salah should be prayed in those two prayers. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala free it. Then he says, فَإِنْ كَانَ يَوْمَ مَطَرٍ فَلَا بَأْسَ بِالصَّلَاةِ فِي الْمَسْجِدِ. If it's a day of rain, then there's no problem. There's no issue in praying the salah, i.e. the Eid salah, inside the masjid. Then he says, الخامس يراعي الوقت فوقت صلاة العيد ما بين طلوع الشمس إلى الزوال. The fifth is that the Eid salah should be prayed in the correct time. What is the correct time for Eid salah? I think we mentioned it last week, from sunrise until the zawal. So basically until dhuhr, just before dhuhr, which is basically salatul duha. That's the duha time. And so Eid salah can be prayed in between those times. As soon as the zawal takes place, where the sun moves slightly from its zenith in the sky, then the salah of Eid has been missed. Then he says, السادس في كيفية الصلاة فليخرج. He goes on now to the way in which the salah should be prayed. He says, فليخرج الناس مكبرين في الطريق وإذا بلغ الإمام المصلى لم يجلس ولم يتنفل. He says that the people should leave their homes and make their way to the musalla, i.e. the place of Eid Salah, mukabbirin, so doing the takbir, etc. And when the Imam arrives at the musalla, he should not sit, nor should he engage in voluntary prayer. ثم ينادي مناد الصلاة جامعة. And then a person should call out that the prayer is about to be held, i.e. the prayer is in congregation. So no adhan or iqama. ويصلي بهم الإمام ركعتين يكبر في الأولى سوى تكبيرة الإحرام والركوع 7 تكبيرات. And so in the first rak'ah, the Imam will initiate 7 rak'at other than the first rak'ah, i.e. the rak'atul, 7 takbirat other than the first takbirah, takbiratul ihram. And this of course is according to the Shafi'i school, which is, I believe, the predominant way prayed in the UK today, except in the Hanafi communities. They'll pray according to the Hanafi madhab, but even then you still find some Hanafi communities, they pray according to the Shafi'i school, as that's the most well-known currently. Then he says, والتكبيرات الزائدة في الثانية 5 سوى تكبيرتي القيام والركوع. And the Imam will add an additional 5 takbirat on top of the takbir of the standing and the takbir of the ruku'. Then he says, ثم يخطب خطبتين بينهما جلسة. And then the Imam will stand and give 2 khutbahs, i.e. 1 khutbah with sitting in between the 2. Unfortunately, many people, they like to leave at the time of the khutbah. And the best practice is to listen to the khutbah. The khutbah is a part of the celebration of Eid, and some may even say a part of the salah. It's a part of the salah, and so a person should listen to the khutbah and benefit. There's no point in fasting the entire month of Ramadan, and as soon as we can, we run away. No, we should stay, and we should want to increase our iman, increase our our understanding. If a person has children, for example, teach them to sit, teach them to listen. Discipline is a part of tarbiyah, and if we cannot teach them when they're young, it's going to be very difficult to teach them when they're old. We have to get our children used to coming to the masjid, used to attending the sha'air of the deen, etc. Then he says, السابع أن يضحي بكبش, that a person sacrifices a ram or something of the sort. وقال عليه الصلاة والسلام من رأى هلال ذي الحجة وأراد أن يضحي فلا يأخذ من شعره ولا من أظفاره شيئا. And he mentions the practice, either it's considered to be sunnah or wajib, depending on the madhab, that the person who sees the moon of Dhul Hijjah and he wants to sacrifice something for that, فلا يأخذ من شعره ولا من أظفاره شيئا. He should not take from his hair nor from his nails, i.e. he should not trim his hair nor should he trim his nails. And so if you're going to get a haircut for Eid, get it in advance. And you'll probably be better off anyway, because the barbers, they charge a lot on Eid and you have to wait for hours just to get a haircut. Then he says, at-tarawih. He goes on to at-tarawih, and he's very brief in this tahdib anyway. وهي 20 ركعة وكيفيتها مشهورة وهي سنة مؤكدة وإن كانت دون العيدين. He says it's 20 rak'at, and that's the opinion of all four schools of fiqh. 20 plus the 3 of witr. So 23 rak'at. And all four schools of fiqh, they agree on this, except the Malikiyah. They say it's more than 23, I believe 40 or plus, something of that number. No school from the four schools of fiqh say that it's 8 rak'at. That's a contemporary opinion. It's not an opinion that is from the four schools. Perhaps you might find that it's a qawl, it's an opinion held by one of the members of the schools, i.e. the four schools, but the official opinion of the Hanabila, the Shafi'iyya, the Ahnaf, 23, and the Malikiyya, more than 23. If a person wants to pray less, no problem. If a person takes the opinion that it's less, no problem. But it's a major problem if that person starts to say, this is bid'ah. It's bid'ah to pray more than 8 plus the 3, i.e. 11. It's bid'ah to pray more than 11 rak'at. If a person takes that opinion, what they are saying is that the school of Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam al-Shafi'i, and Imam Ahmad are following a bid'ah, which of course is absurd. And so if a person wants to pray 11, no problem whatsoever. But it's best to follow the Imam. And the fuqaha, these four schools, the four Imams, if they come to an opinion, it's very, very difficult to suggest that an opinion which goes against their opinion is going to be correct. And if I follow an opinion which goes against the opinion of the four schools, I should question my own understanding before questioning the understanding of the fuqaha. If I follow an opinion which is a contemporary opinion, and I find that it goes against one of the four Imams, I shouldn't question one of the four Imams. I should question the opinion that I'm following. Because the fuqaha of our time, where did they get their knowledge from? From the fuqaha of the earlier generations, not the other way around. And the idea that the ulama of our time, they've seen ahadith that the ulama of the past didn't see. Where did those ahadith come from? From the ulama of the past. So how is that possible? And fiqh is not following the correct hadith, authentic hadith. That's not how fiqh works. Fiqh has never been about correct or authentic hadith over weak or inauthentic hadith. It doesn't work like that. And if you go to the books of fiqh, you'll see this. The books of fiqh are full of weak ahadith, full of ahadith which are not stronger than others, etc. But fiqh is something which has been inherited. The understanding of the Sahaba was inherited and documented by the ulama, the fuqaha, their students, etc. and passed down to us generation after generation after generation. And so when you follow a madhab, you are following a peer-reviewed formulation of the understanding of the Sahaba, of the words of the Prophet ﷺ and the Quran. And that's the best approach. That's the safest approach. One day, bi'idhnillah, when a person becomes a mujtahid and they are able to look at the Quran and look at the Sunnah by themselves, and they can deduce rulings, etc., and determine the weak from the strong, etc., then they have every right to follow their own opinion. But until that time, a person should be very careful in the way they speak about the fuqaha, the madhahib, and the opinions of others, even contemporary scholars. If we follow a madhab, it doesn't mean that we disregard or we are disrespectful towards contemporary scholars. That's not from the akhlaq of Islam. And that's a misunderstanding of Islam. And unfortunately today you'll find a person who may increase in knowledge, but they decrease in akhlaq. Prior to studying, you find a person has akhlaq. After studying, they lose their akhlaq. Why? Because they start to develop arrogance and they start to develop issues of the heart based upon their studying, which is a very bad sign. Knowledge should humble a person and not make a person arrogant. And if you find a person that is studying and they are arrogant, either they are in the beginning of their studies and they assume that that which they have studied is knowledge itself, or there's something wrong with the way they're studying. And so we have to be very careful. And that's also the importance of mulazama or musahaba, having a teacher that you know and the teacher knows you, and the teacher will pull you up and teach you when you're being arrogant or being rude, etc. Then he says, وقد خرج رسول الله عليه الصلاة والسلام, or sorry, he says, وإن كانت دون العيدين واختلفوا في أن الجماعة فيها أفضل أم الانفراد. So he mentions that the Eidain are higher in regards to the Sunniyah of them than the Taraweeh. And he says that there's a difference of opinion. Is Taraweeh better to be prayed in Jama'ah or to be prayed bil-infirad, i.e. individuals praying by themselves, etc. And perhaps this is more related to the ulama or the times of the past. In our time today, praying in Jama'ah is best. Why? For the community, for the hearing the Quran, the reminders, etc. Supporting our communities, especially as a minority group. It's important that every opportunity we get to come together, we come together. And we don't live as sheep that are separated from one another. Why? Because the wolf will attack us one by one. So it's important that when we have the opportunity to come together, we come together. Then he says, وقد خرج رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فيها ليلتين أو ثلاثا للجماعة ثم لم يخرج وقال أخاف أن توجب عليكم. So the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, he came out and he prayed in Jama'ah. He says ليلتين أو ثلاثا, and then he didn't come after that, and he said, I'm afraid that if I continue it daily, it will become wajib upon you. He then goes on to say, وجمع عمر رضي الله تعالى عنه الناس عليها في الجماعة حيث أمن من الوجوب بانقطاع الوحي. After him, Umar رضي الله عنه, he brought the people together in congregation. They prayed it collectively in congregation. Why? Because wahi had come to an end. Revelation was no longer coming, as the Prophet ﷺ had passed away, ﷺ. And so Umar رضي الله عنه didn't worry that it's going to become wajib, because if it becomes wajib, it becomes difficult. It becomes difficult because it means the one who's not doing it is sinning. And then he moves on to al-qism al-thalith, and so we'll look at that next week inshallah. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad.